Hi, I'm Paul from the Studio Rats. Right, just about to go into the studio. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to plan what guitars I'm going to be using for specific jobs. Now we're going into the studio to record this track, and the track is quite heavily guitar layered, so I need lots of different guitar tones. Now what I'm going to do in today's video is just to go over the differences or how different types of pickups sound. So I'm going to be using a Strat style guitar. This is a Friedman Vintage S with 3 single coils. I've got a Les Paul with humbuckers, and I've got a Les Paul Special with P90s. And what I want to try and do is to, well, one, to show you the difference of how these pickups sound, but also to make the decision about what guitars I'm going to be using for certain jobs. Now, all I'm concerned about today is the guitar solo. Yes, there's a guitar solo in this track. I know no one does guitar solos anymore, but there's going to be one in this track. So what I want to decide is, do I want to use, for the guitar solo, single coils, humbuckers or P90s, and to show you the difference of those pickups, just in case you're thinking of buying either one of those guitars. We'll start with the Strat with single coils. Now I'll go through the pluses and minuses of each pickup. Strat pickups, single coil pickups, cut through a mix incredibly well. Mainly why people use a Strat. The only thing about Strat, and this isn't as bad as the P90s, but because they're single coils, they have hum. So when you add gain to single coils, they tend to be quite noisy. Now in a track, you don't really notice this, but it's something to be aware of. So let's play the same sort of thing on each guitar without a track on the neck position, so you can hear the differences between each guitar. So 3 different sounding guitars. Now that's with more of a sort of breakup drive tone. Now I'm going for a more lead tone with this track. So let's record the solo using the Strat first of all and see how that sounds. So good single coils like this, and these are at the moment my favourite single coils. These are the pickups that come with the Friedman Vintage S, but you can buy these pickups separately from Friedman's website. And I think these are possibly the best Strat style pickups that I've ever played. I really like them. They've got a bit more output than a standard Strat, so they can compete more with those sort of humbucker and P90 sort of tones. So first impressions, I like the sound of the single coils. They're a bit thinner than what I want, so let's go to P90s, which have a slightly fatter tone. P90s, to my ears, sound the most vintage out of all pickups. They have that sort of mid-range poke on them, which is different to a single coil. They haven't quite got the top end sheen that a single coil's got, also that some humbuckers have, but they have this big sort of mid bump on it, which can really cut through a mix. Personally, I love P90s. I think if you're on the fence, you don't know whether to buy a Strat with single coils or say like more of a Les Paul with humbuckers, I think the perfect in between are P90s because they have the best of both worlds. Now, the only problem with P90s, as you'll hear if I turn up the volume a little bit, they tend to be quite noisy, more noisy than single coils and a lot more noisy than humbuckers. But again, you don't really hear it in the mix. So let's record the same solo or as close as possible using the P90 Les Paul Special. For this track, I definitely prefer the sound of the P90s. Granted, I am using overdrive, so I guess those more sort of high output, mid throaty sort of sounding pickups are going to sit better in a mix than a single coil, which occasionally could get lost in a mix. Let's put this one back. Let's get out a Les Paul with humbuckers and see how that sounds. So this is a Les Paul with humbuckers. Different sound to the P90s and the single coils. This is much more, it can have the top end clarity of the single coils, not quite as much, and it hasn't quite got that sort of mid poke that P90s have. Now again, I'm going to be using that breakup sound. As you heard with the Strat at the beginning, the Strat had a cleaner sort of tone, and the Les Paul definitely pushes the amp there a little bit more. Now these aren't high output pickups at all, these are Gibson custom buckers. I think, and they're quite low output compared to a lot of humbuckers you can get out there, and they have a lot more clarity than some of the more high output pickups. So let's record that solo again using the Les Paul and we'll see how that sounds. So personally, I think the Les Paul really works for that track and that sort of solo, that sort of overdriven solo. The thing that I really like about Les Paul, especially with these custom buckers, are that extra sort of chirp that you get on the top end when you pick a note. One of the things I have to be conscious of when I'm playing all these different guitars are the different scale lengths. The Les Paul has a much more slinky feel. I'm using the same strings on all my guitars, they're all 10 to 46, but the Les Paul has a much more slinky feel due to the scale length. The Strat scale length is slightly longer, so I've got to, when I'm bending the notes, I've got to push that a little bit harder. And when you're comparing each of these different guitars, you've really got to concentrate on pushing the bends up to the right note, which I might have missed a couple of times when I was playing, but the Les Paul definitely has that easier feel about it. So I really hope all the different tones on the different pickups came across. Sometimes with YouTube, some of the sound does tend to get a little bit lost. But there is a slight difference, and I think you can hear that the Strat definitely has more sort of top end presence. The Les Paul Special with P90s definitely has that mid hump that can push that solo through the mix. But the Les Paul has a smoother sort of tone, but again with that sort of added top end. Anyway, really hope you guys got something out of this video. If you did get something out of it, don't forget to like and subscribe, click on the bell button, and you'll be notified of any future video that comes out from the Studio Rats. I'm Paul, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.